Good afternoon. I want to discuss something that the financial analysts on mainstream television won't tell you, something that strikes at the very heart of how American capitalism has maintained its global dominance for the past 70 years. We're watching the death of the petrodollar system in real time, and let me be absolutely clear, this is not a sideshow. This is the main event, the architecture of American financial imperialism. To understand what's happening, we need to understand how the system actually works, not the mythology they teach in business schools, but the material reality. After World War II, the United States emerged as the dominant capitalist power. Europe was devastated. The Soviet Union was isolated. American corporations controlled the means of production. American banks controlled the money. American military bases surrounded the planet. The ruling class faced one problem. How do you maintain that dominance indefinitely? The answer came from the Bretton Woods Conference. The solution was ingenious. Make the dollar the world's reserve currency. Make oil tradable only in dollars. Make every country dependent on dollar-denominated debt. You see, the genius of this system was that it didn't require American tanks on every street corner. It required something far more powerful, economic dependency. A country needed dollars to buy energy, so it had to produce something to trade for dollars. So it had to orient its entire economy towards serving American corporations. So its workers labored to enrich American capitalists. So American capital accumulated without limit. This is imperialism without the appearance of imperialism. It's much more efficient than old-fashioned colonialism. You don't need to directly rule. You just control the money. And when you control the money, you control everything. The contradictions emerge. But here's what the American capitalist class failed to understand. Systems based on exploitation eventually encounter resistance. It starts small. A country here, a country there begins to question whether it really needs American permission to trade, whether it really needs to keep its reserves in dollars, whether it really needs to accept IMF conditions. Venezuela asked these questions. So did Iran. So did Russia. So did China. And you know what happened? The United States responded by doing exactly what I predicted it would do. It used its financial weapons more aggressively, more sanctions, more asset freezes, more exclusions from the SWIFT banking system, more threats, more coercion. But here's the crucial point. Every time Washington uses its financial power as a weapon, it demonstrates that the dollar is a weapon. And when a weapon is revealed, people start building shields. The laboratory of resistance, Venezuela. Venezuela is crucial because it demonstrates exactly how this works in practice. The Venezuelan capitalist class, historically dependent on American oil companies for their profits, used to accept American dominance. They would sell oil. Americans would buy it. Profits would flow to both groups of capitalists. Venezuelan workers would get scraps. But when Venezuela tried to nationalize its oil industry, when it attempted to use its own resources for Venezuelan development, the American ruling class responded with economic warfare, sanctions, blockades, threats, coup attempts. The goal was simple. Make Venezuela so desperate that it would reverse course and return its oil to American corporate control. But something unexpected happened, something the American planners didn't anticipate. Venezuela didn't collapse. It adapted. And in adapting, Venezuela revealed something profound. You can actually trade without dollars. You can actually develop without American permission. Now, Venezuela's economy has suffered tremendously, and there's no denying that, but it has survived, and more importantly, it has survived while rejecting American terms. That's the revolutionary moment, not because Venezuela became socialist or communist or anything like that, but because it demonstrated that resistance is possible. The crack in the foundation. Here's what's happening now that should terrify the American financial establishment. Countries are starting to trade with each other in currencies other than the dollar. Brazil and China conduct bilateral trade in reals and yuanes. bypassing the dollar entirely. Russia and India develop payment systems outside of SWIFT. Venezuela trades oil in rubles, bolivares, and gold. The BRICS nations create their own development bank that doesn't require IMF approval. Central banks around the world reduce their dollar reserves and accumulate gold instead. These might sound like technical details, but they are, in fact, the demolition of the entire structure of American financial hegemony. Think about it. If the world can trade without dollars, then the dollar is just another currency. And if it's just another currency, American financial dominance evaporates. The emperor has no clothes. Who benefits? Who loses? Now, let's be very precise about the class dynamics, because this is where the real analysis happens. American financial capitalists lose everything. The bankers on Wall Street, the hedge fund managers, the venture capitalists whose entire fortunes depend on the dollar's global supremacy. They're witnessing the erosion of their power. But it's important to understand they will fight desperately to maintain it. They will wage trade wars. They will threaten military intervention. They will attempt to destabilize any country that steps out of line. They will use every tool at their disposal. And here's the crucial point that the progressive left sometimes misses. This fight could easily slip into a third world war. Because when a capitalist class faces the loss of its dominance, when its profits are threatened, when its power is evaporating, it often turns to military solutions as a last resort. That's not inevitable, but it's certainly possible. American workers lose too, but differently. In the short term, as American corporations become less profitable because they can no longer extract unlimited value from the global South, American wages will stagnate or decline. American jobs will disappear. Social services will be cut even further. The working class will be told it must sacrifice so that American greatness can be restored. This is already happening. It will accelerate. Latin American capitalists experience a mixed outcome. Those in resource extraction, oil, mining, agriculture, suddenly have more negotiating power. Instead of selling to one buyer at a dictated price, they can play multiple powers against each other. They can get better terms. Their profits potentially increase, but they also face new pressures. They have to actually compete. They can't rely on American protection. And most importantly, their workers now have more options. A Venezuelan worker can look to Russia and China for solidarity. A Brazilian worker can see that alternatives exist. This is where the real transformation could happen. If Latin American workers can organize and demand that the wealth from their nation's resources benefits them, not just a new group of capitalist cronies, then we're talking about genuine development, genuine sovereignty, genuine improvement in living standards. But that requires political struggle, that requires organization, that requires consciousness, and that's not guaranteed. The monetary trap. Let me explain something that most economists deliberately obscure. A currency's value, in the real world, not in the fantasy world of mainstream economics, depends on one fundamental thing. Can you use it to buy things you need? For 70 years, you could use dollars to buy oil, and oil is essential to modern economy. So dollars were essential. So the dollar was powerful. But what happens when you can buy oil in yuans, or rubles, or gold, or through barter arrangements that bypass currency entirely? The dollar becomes optional. And once a currency becomes optional, its value declines. And once its value declines, its power declines. And once its power declines, the entire structure of American financial dominance collapses. This is happening. It's not a prediction. It's already underway. Look at the facts. Oil-producing nations are increasingly pricing oil in non-dollar currencies. Central banks are diversifying away from dollars. Alternative payment systems are being built. Trade between major economies is increasingly conducted outside the dollar system. Cryptocurrencies backed by nations are being developed. None of these things can be stopped by American threats because they're responding to the fundamental logic of capitalism, Everyone acts in their own economic interest, and it's now in the economic interest of most nations to reduce their dependence on American financial coercion. The irony of sanctions. Here's the beautiful irony that I find genuinely fascinating as an economist. American sanctions are accelerating the very thing they're designed to prevent. When the United States sanctions Russia, what happens? Russia develops alternative payment systems. Russia deepens its relationship with China. Russia becomes less dependent on American financial architecture. The same happened with Iran. The same is happening with Venezuela. The same could happen with many other nations that are tired of living under American financial occupation. Every sanction is a tutorial in how to escape from the dollar system. Every sanction demonstrates to other countries, look, the Americans will use their financial power as a weapon whenever it suits them. We had better build alternatives. Washington has essentially automated the destruction of its own hegemony. It's like watching a man sawing off the branch he's sitting on while insisting that he's in complete control. The geopolitical implications. Now let's talk about what this means for global power arrangements. For the past 70 years, American military superiority was backed by financial dominance. The military protected American corporate interests. The financial system extracted resources and labor value from the global South. The two reinforced each other. But when the financial system begins to crumble, the military becomes less effective. Why? Because military power in the modern world is extremely expensive. It requires a robust economy to sustain it, and a robust economy increasingly requires access to global markets and resources. As American financial power declines, American ability to sustain its military dominance also declines. Meanwhile, Russia and China, who have been preparing for exactly this moment, have been building alternative military, economic, and political arrangements. This is not a situation where Russia and China are more powerful than America. They're not. American military spending still exceeds that of Russia, China, and all of Europe combined. But it is a situation where Russia and China have options, while America is becoming increasingly isolated. And options matter. In a multipolar world, the rigid, unilateral power of America becomes less effective. When countries can choose between multiple powers, no single power can dictate terms. The transition period, most dangerous. I want to emphasize something important. The transition from American hegemony to multipolarity is the most dangerous period. Not the period after the transition is complete, but the transition itself. Here's why. Declining empires are unpredictable. A declining empire still has enormous military power. A declining empire is losing economic power. A declining empire's ruling class is desperate and potentially irrational. This is the recipe for adventurism, for military miscalculation, for wars fought not for rational economic reasons, but for the sake of wounded pride and the maintenance of power. We've seen this before. The British Empire, facing decline, made reckless military decisions. The German Empire, facing encirclement, started a world war. Any declining power is dangerous because it has everything to lose and increasingly nothing to gain from restraint. We should be very concerned about this. The question of agency. Here's what I want to emphasize to anyone watching this transition carefully. None of this is inevitable. Russia and China are not conquering the world. They're not some alternative saviors. They're capitalist powers pursuing capitalist interests, which means they're competing with American capitalism for access to markets, resources, and labor. The multipolarity that's emerging is not the result of some grand plan by Russia and China. It's the result of the exhaustion of American unilateral dominance combined with the development of productive capacity in other regions. What's emerging is more like a return to pre-World War II conditions, a world with multiple capitalist powers competing with each other, each with regional spheres of influence, each capable of military and economic coercion within their sphere. This could lead to a new form of cooperation between rival powers based on spheres of influence, increasing conflict and military confrontation, trade wars and economic sanctions, regional conflicts that could escalate to global wars. The outcome is not predetermined. It depends on the choices that human beings make. And here's the crucial point for the working class. The transition from one form of capitalist imperialism to another is not progress. It's a rearrangement of who dominates, but not a fundamental change in the system of domination itself. What would represent genuine progress is if this transition period could be used by working people around the world to build something fundamentally different, to organize, to demand control over the decisions that affect their lives, to create economic systems based on democracy and human need rather than capitalist profit. That's the real struggle. The role of Latin America. Latin America occupies a unique position in this transition. The region has vast energy resources, oil, gas, lithium, vast agricultural capacity, strategic geographic position, a working class increasingly conscious of its own power, a history of resistance to American domination. If Latin America can organize itself, if workers can take control of their own countries, if the region can build genuine regional cooperation based on solidarity, then Latin America could emerge from this transition as a region of relative prosperity and autonomy. If it doesn't, if it simply trades one master for another, if a new comprador capitalist class emerges that collaborates with Russia or China the way the old one collaborated with America, then nothing fundamental changes. The exploitation continues. The workers still get scraps. The difference is determined by whether working people organize for their own interests. The dollar's last days. Let me be direct about what I expect to see in the coming years. The dollar will gradually lose its position as the world's reserve currency. This will happen slowly, not in a sudden collapse, but it will happen. More bilateral trade will occur in non-dollar currencies. More nations will develop alternative payment systems. Central banks will continue diversifying away from dollars. The BRICS will likely develop its own currency or currency system backed by commodities. The dollar will eventually settle into being just one currency among many. This will have profound implications for the American economy. American companies will lose the advantage of cheap financing. American consumers will face imported inflation as the dollar weakens. American military spending will become much more expensive relative to the economy. American workers will face declining real wages as purchasing power falls. The American working class will be told to sacrifice for national greatness. This is not a prediction of American collapse. The United States will remain a major economic and military power, but it will no longer have the ability to extract unlimited value from the global system. It will have to actually compete. It will have to actually produce value instead of simply commanding it through financial dominance. This is terrifying to the American capitalist class, and they will fight it with everything they have. The responsibility of the left. I want to address the progressive movements, the labor movements, and the socialist movements that are watching this unfold. We must not be cheerleaders for Russia or China or any capitalist power. Yes, it's true that multipolarity reduces American hegemonic power. Yes, it's true that this creates space for other nations to pursue more independent policies. Yes, it's true that American sanctions and military threats have caused tremendous suffering. But replacing American imperialism with Russian or Chinese imperialism is not liberation. It's just a change of masters. Our responsibility is to oppose imperialism in all its forms, American, Russian, Chinese, and any other, build solidarity between working people across borders, not solidarity with capitalist governments, but with workers and oppressed people, demand that the wealth and resources of nations are controlled by the working people who produce them, not by any capitalist class, foreign or domestic. Use this period of transition to build alternative economic structures. cooperatives, worker-controlled enterprises, democratic planning based on need, the multipolarity that's emerging can be progressive if working people take control of it, but it can also simply be a rearrangement of capitalist domination if we allow capitalist forces to determine the outcome. That's the real fight. Conclusion: watching the empire crack. When Russian warships arrive in Venezuelan ports, when China and Russia develop alternative payment systems, when BRICS nations create their own development bank, when countries trade in currencies other than dollars, what we're witnessing is not the creation of a new empire. We're witnessing the crack in the foundation of an old one. American capitalism maintained its dominance not primarily through military force, though that was important. It maintained dominance through financial control, through making the dollar indispensable, through making other nations dependent on American capital for development. That system is crumbling, not because Russia and China are so brilliant, but because the fundamental contradictions of capitalism have played themselves out on a global scale. When you try to maintain infinite control over a finite world, when you try to extract unlimited profits while paying workers starvation wages, when you try to maintain peace through military dominance while impoverishing billions, eventually the system collapses. We're watching that collapse happen. The question now is what replaces it? An American ruling class will tell you that we must prevent multipolarity, prevent the rise of China and Russia, maintain American dominance forever. But that's impossible. The world has changed. The contradictions are too deep. The forces are too powerful. A new capitalist multipolar order is emerging regardless of what America does, but a fundamentally different world, one based on solidarity, on democracy, on meeting human needs rather than maximizing capitalist profits, that requires us to organize, to struggle, to build something completely new. That's where our energy must go, not supporting one empire against another, but building the power of working people to control their own destinies. That's the real revolution happening beneath the surface of these geopolitical shifts. That's what matters, a